In Leviticus chapter 10, there's the account of Nadab and Abihu as they offered strange fire before the Lord that the Lord had not commanded them. And because of that, it says fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them. When Moses was explaining to Aaron the reason why this happened, he said to Aaron that God is to be treated as holy, and God is to be honored among all the people. So what I'd like to do today is talk about that a little bit. We are to treat God as holy. We are to honor Him. And we know certainly obeying Him is important because Nadab and Abihu did not obey Him and they suffered for it. But what other things are we to do? How do we go about treating God as holy and honoring Him? Now, if we're going to do that correctly, we have to hear from God Himself to tell us what's involved in treating Him as holy and honoring Him. And God has done that. We can find a very good explanation of that among the 10 commandments that were given to the nation of Israel. 3 of those commandments deal specifically with our relationship and our interactions with God. And I want to look at those as part of this lesson. All of those commandments, though they were given to the nation of Israel, they likewise apply to Christians as well. So let's bear that in mind as we read these. I want to turn to Exodus chapter 20. We will find the first 3 commandments right there, and we're going to take them one at a time. The first part says, starting in verse 1, "Then God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me." In that command, there are really 2 parts to that command, and I want to emphasize something about both of those. The first one says, I am the Lord your God. So the first one says, I am your God. And the second part of that says, you shall have no other gods before me. All right? You shall have no other gods. All right. First of all, I want you to notice very specifically in that first phrase the use of I am. I am your God. You'll recall in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 14, when Moses was given the task to go off into the land of Egypt to approach Pharaoh and ask him to let the people go. And Moses was very concerned about the Israelites and how to convince them that he was from God. And he says, what if they ask me who sent me? And he said, you tell them, I am. Okay, that was the name by which God was known. So in this first command, he says very clearly to the people, I am your God. Okay, and then he goes on to qualify it. He qualifies it. He says, I am the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So that's something he's done for you. I brought you out of the house of slavery. He is, of course, the creator, the one who created the heavens, the earth, the universe, gave us life, and created everything within it. So it's important to remember that God is responsible for all the blessings that we have. He is the source. We owe him everything. And that's an important part of understanding and honoring God. The danger here, of course, and it's one we see today in the world today, is people sometimes think that they're self-made. Right? I did it. Without giving proper honor and recognition that everything you have and are is attributed to God. And it's interesting, in Deuteronomy chapter 8, as Moses is talking from the Lord, he has some warnings for the people. And he mentions this specifically. So I want to start reading in verse 10, and I may jump around a little bit. He says this, "When you have eaten and are satisfied, you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you," because it was the land that produced the food and the things that you're eating. "Beware," here's the danger, "lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his ordinances and his statutes which I am commanding you today. Lest when you have eaten and are satisfied and have built good houses and lived in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and gold multiply, and all that you have multiplies, then your heart becomes proud, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." So there's the warning. When things get really good, then you forget God. Don't do that, right? Don't attribute all these things to yourselves. "Otherwise, you may say in your heart, my power and the strength of my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who is giving you power to make wealth, that he may confirm his covenant which he swore to your fathers as it is this day." There he's speaking to the nation of Israel and to their promises. But to us, we suffer this same difficulty. When things get good, we forget to thank God. We forget about the blessings. We think, wow, I've done a great thing. But what does the text say? For it is he who is giving you the power to make wealth, to confirm your success. And going on, there's a warning that comes with this. "And it shall come about, if you ever forget the Lord your God, and go after other gods, and serve them, and worship them, I testify against you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not listen to the voice of the Lord your God." I think during these days of the coronavirus, it's appropriate to pause for a moment and give that verse some extra thought. So, we owe everything to God. He is the giver of all the blessings we have, and we should recognize that. And because of that, we should truly respect him, love him, obey him, and want to honor him. The second part of that verse says, "You shall have no other gods before me." That command specifically excludes the idea of worshiping anyone other than I am. Okay? And I want to add to that, when we think about worshiping other gods or idols or things like that, what you're doing is you are basically turning around and attributing the works of God to someone else or something else. And God says, no, you shall not do that. I am God. I created the heavens and the earth and everything in them. I gave you life. I am the one blessing you. You shall not turn around and give credit to anyone or anything else. And that's basically what happens when people choose to worship other gods or other idols or other such things as that. And I think the other part of that is, for us today, there is to be nothing that we give a higher priority than God. God is to be priority number one. And when we place anything between us and God and get diverted by that, we have essentially established an idol. We are giving our worship, we're giving our praise, we're giving our focus and attention to something else instead of God. So we can fall into that same trap. And in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus spoke about the idea of wealth and what wealth can do to us as we get carried away by riches and the things of this world. He said, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And in verse 24, no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. You cannot serve God and riches. Matthew 6:24. Okay, let's read on to the next commandment. This is found starting in verse 4. You shall not make for yourself an idol. Some translations say a graven image. A graven image, or any likeness of what is in the heaven above, or the earth beneath, or the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make for yourself an idol, a graven image, and worship or serve them. A graven image is the notion of a man-made image, a man-made artifact of some kind. Okay? You shall not worship false gods. You shall not make something and turn around and fall down to it and worship it or give it some kind of special attention in that regard. There's actually an interesting passage found in Isaiah chapter 44. It's almost comical as to what's being put forth, but there's a powerful lesson, and it's spot on. It's exactly what people have done. And it's in chapter 44, and I'm going to skip around a little bit, but it's between verses 9 and 19. So here's what Isaiah wrote. Those who fashion a graven image are all of them futile, and their precious things are of no profit. Even their own witnesses fail to see or know, so that they will be put to shame. Who has fashioned a god or cast an idol to no profit? And then he goes down. The man shapes iron into his cutting tools and does the work of his coals, fashioning it with hammers and a strong arm. Another shapes wood. He extends a measuring line, outlines it with red chalk, works with planes, outlines it with a compass, makes it like the form of a man, like the beauty of a man, so that it may sit in a house. Surely he cuts cedars for himself. He takes a cypress or an oak and raises it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a fir, the rain makes it grow. Then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them, warms himself. He also makes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He makes it a graven image and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire over the half. Over this half, he eats his meal. He roasts a roast, and that's satisfied. He also warms himself and says, I'm warm. I've seen the fire. But the rest of it he makes into a god, a graven image. He falls down before it and worships it. He also prays to it and says, deliver me, for thou art my God. They do not know, nor do they understand. For he has smeared over their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot comprehend. So what is he talking about? He's talking about taking a tree that grew in the forest that God gave, chopping it down, taking half of it, setting it on fire, burning to keep warm and to cook his food. The other half of the log he takes, he carves it into the shape of something, and then he worships it. You know, it's hard not to smile at that one. And yet, that's what people have done in the past. So, no graven images means no God substitutes here, okay? There are to be no religious relics or artifacts that substitute for God either. So we do not put an image of a cross up and fall down before the cross in worship and prayer. We do not make an image, a relic of a saint, of the Apostle Peter or Paul, and fall down and pray to them. That is a graven image. That would be idol worship, because we are to worship God and to God alone. The other thing is, we do not make any attempt at a physical representation or model of God. Okay? There is nothing we can put together that would physically, properly glorify God. Let's take a look at Deuteronomy chapter 4. Moses points this out in this chapter. In chapter 4, starting in verse, let's see here, 10, I believe. Yes. Remember the day you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, when the Lord said to me, Assemble the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, and that they may teach their children. And you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the very heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you from the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form, only a voice. So he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform. That is the 10 Commandments, that he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. And the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and judgments, that you may perform them in the land where you're going over to possess it. So watch yourselves carefully, since you did not see any form on that day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb from the midst of the fire, lest you act corruptly and make a graven image for yourself in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on the earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the sky, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water below the earth. And beware lest you lift up your eyes to the heaven and see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, and be drawn away and worship them and serve them, those which the Lord your God has allotted to all the people under the heavens. God is a spirit. God is not physical, and any attempt to represent him is degrading. It is a poor representation, and it is degrading before the Lord. It dishonors him, because you're dragging him down to some level that he's not. He's far above anything you can put together, and we must always remember that. Finally, there is one interesting thing that I wanted to read. Moses was obviously very curious about God, and he asked at one time if he could see the glory of God. And God had an answer for him, and it was found in Exodus chapter 33, starting in verse 18. Moses said, I pray thee, show me thy glory. And he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show compassion on whom I will show compassion. But he said, you cannot see my face, for no man can see me and live. Then the Lord said, behold, there's a place by me, and you shall stand there on the rock. And it will come about, while my glory is passing by, that I will put you in the cleft of that rock, and cover you with my hand until I've passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen. It's a fascinating passage. Moses was obviously wanted to be closer to God, and God granted Moses something that no other man was granted, and that was an opportunity to witness some representation of his glory, okay? And that obviously meant something to Moses. All right, so the second one was no graven images of worship. Okay? All right, let's look at the third one. This is from chapter 20 and verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished, or some translations say guiltless, who takes his name in vain. So at this particular time, there were some people who would swear an oath. So they would like enter into a contract or an agreement, and they would swear by the name of the Lord. I swear by the name of God Almighty that I will do thus and thus. And then they were refusing to do it, backing out of it, right? So to do that is to take the Lord's name in vain, okay? Meaningless, irrelevant in terms of that. So that's part of what goes on to here. In Leviticus chapter 19, Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 12, it says, And you shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Okay? To profane the name of your God. What does it mean to profane? To profane something is to treat it as irrelevant, to disregard it, to disrespect something, particularly something that's intended to be sacred or holy. So we will not disrespect the name of I am, of our God. Okay? We're not to treat it lightly. We're not to treat it in a rash manner, in a groundless, unsubstantial manner. So how do we do that? How do we often do that today? We said we're not to profane the name of the Lord. The word profanity, okay, profanity is doing that. It's profaning something. Profanity is where we actually do something, say something. In our language today, we have profanity that we think of. It's one of two things. It's either something we say obscene, and very often taken in a sexual connotation, something obscene. But the other way is we do profanity is we use some representation of God, His name, or some spiritual quantity, and we use it in a way it's not intended to be used. So the words hell, damnation are biblical words, and we can talk about them because they have a religious, spiritual significance. But when we use them in a way that they're not intended, we are profaning them. We are profaning something that is sacred before God, that He has sacrificed His Son for, that we are making light of. When we take the name of the Lord in vain, something happens and we'll say, oh my God. That's taking the Lord's name in vain. You are not appealing to God as an act of worship. You're appealing to it in an act of frustration of some kind. Some people will say Jesus Christ and use that as a profanity, right? This is not to be, and this is a sin, and God speaks directly against that. We are not to use God in forms of frivolous entertainment, mocking God in song, in deed, in TV shows or comedies or things like that, right? And I submit to you, we are not to be referring to God by name in any non-religious purpose, okay? So if you're using God's name or talking about these terms and it's not involved in prayer, in worship, or in Bible study, you're taking the Lord's name in vain. And this is a very serious thing with regards to treating God as holy and as honoring Him. So we are not, get my pen working, to take God's name in vain. So as we step back and look at these things, I hope there's a clear picture that's coming forth. God is our God. I am is our God. He's the creator of the heavens and the earth. He gave life to all of us. He has blessed us richly as stewards of this land, that we can use the things He's given us to enjoy and to accomplish great things. But all of this still comes from God, and we need to remember that. There is to be no substitute for God, okay? Give God His credit. Attribute to Him the things He has done and recognize them as true blessings. We are not self-made. We are enabled by God to do things that we are able to do, some of which succeed, some of which fail from our foolishness. But God is the source of all the blessings we have. We're to make no graven images of worship, okay? We're not to worship other humans or saints or icons or relics or artifacts, nor are we to try to represent God as something physical. Okay? God blessed us by sending His Son to earth in a physical form, a spirit that was the Son of God in flesh and blood as Jesus. And He did that for a number of things, right? To teach us, to show us how to live a Christian life, to share and reveal God's Word to us, and ultimately as a sacrifice on the cross for us. But we are not to try and make some image, a physical image of worship before God. And finally, we're not to treat Him lightly. Don't take His name in vain. Don't use His name or talk about Him in contexts which are not spiritually worship, prayer, or study. Don't make light of Him, okay? That is extremely offensive. So as we think about these things, I hope that this will help us come to a greater understanding of what we need to do if we're going to treat God as holy and truly honor Him as He's always intended.